The icy wind howls across a Norwegian fjord. Torches flicker in the night air. A crowd gathers on the rocky shore, their breaths rising in pale clouds against the darkness. At the center stands a woman, bound tightly with rope, her face streaked with salt and tears. She is forced into a sack, her cries muffled by rough wool and jeering voices. With a shove, the sack topples into the black water, swallowed by the fjord. Within moments, silence falls. No blood was spilled, no sword drawn. Yet to Viking eyes, justice has been served. This was not war. This was not plunder. This was punishment for the gravest betrayal a woman could commit: adultery. To the Vikings, infidelity was not a private scandal, but a rupture of the very fabric of honor. In their world, honor was life itself, an inheritance more valuable than land or silver. To stain a husband's name with another man's seed was treachery of the deepest kind. It cast doubt on lineage, inheritance, and power, and in a society built upon fragile kin alliances, the wrong whisper of infidelity could bring ruin not only to a woman, but to her entire clan. We often picture the Vikings as fearless warriors, sailing dragon-proud ships across storm-tossed seas, carving kingdoms with axe and shield. Yet beneath the romance of sagas lies a darker truth. These same men, raiders, traders, rulers, also enforced brutal codes upon their wives and daughters. The same society that celebrated courage in battle had little mercy for women who broke the silent covenant of loyalty. The punishments were varied, each carrying its own cruelty. Some were symbolic: shaving a woman's hair, parading her through the settlement in rags, forcing her to stand on a dung heap while the community spat upon her. Others were harsher: exile into the wilderness with no kinship protection, a sentence as good as death. And in the most extreme cases, women were drowned, burned, or strangled, made to vanish as if their dishonor could be washed from the world. But what made these punishments so horrific was not simply the pain or humiliation. It was the permanence. A Viking woman accused of infidelity did not merely lose her husband. She lost her dowry, her children's inheritance, her standing in the eyes of gods and men. She was cut out of the web of kinship that gave her life meaning. In a society where survival depended on family, this was annihilation. Tonight, we journey into that forbidden world, the world of Viking justice against women who were accused of desiring beyond their husband's control. We will uncover the rituals of shame, the executions whispered in saga verses, the cultural double standards that allowed men their freedom while binding women to silence and fear. And yet, what we uncover will not be a tale of isolated cruelty. It is a mirror, for though 1,000 years separate us from those fjords, the echoes of this brutality still ripple through time. But drowning was only the beginning. The Vikings had punishments that cut deeper, not just into the body, but into the soul. Desire in the Viking Age was never simply a private emotion. It was a currency of power, an invisible chain linking women to husbands, husbands to clans, and clans to the fragile stability of an honor-based society. To love outside those chains, or even to be suspected of it, was to disrupt the balance. Marriage among the Norse was not born of romance. It was a contract, a negotiation between families, sealed with silver and land. A woman carried her dowry into her marriage, and her honor was bound to it. Her chastity became a symbol of her family's dignity. If she strayed, it was not merely a betrayal of her husband. It was an insult to every relative who had invested in that union. And here lay the double standard. Men could take concubines from raids, bed slaves, and visit prostitutes with little risk of censure. Male virility was tolerated, even celebrated. But for women, intimacy outside marriage was treason. Her body was not seen as her own. It was her husband's lineage, her clan's reputation, her children's inheritance. Infidelity was not judged by passion, but by property. This control was reinforced through rituals and law. In the Gragas, the medieval Icelandic law code, we find chillingly precise guidelines. If a wife was caught in bed with another man, her husband had legal right to separate from her instantly, to seize back her dowry, and to expel her from the household. If her lover was of low birth, the shame doubled, dragging her entire family down with her. In this world, intimacy was never equal. It was a battlefield of status. But control was not just written into law, it was carved into culture. Saga literature reveals the quiet terror that haunted Viking women. In Laxdæla Saga, a woman accused of adultery is mocked in verse, her reputation shredded not with swords but with words. In a society where poetry was immortal, to be insulted in verse was a punishment that outlived death. At the same time, sagas show how women could wield their own sexual power, though often at a cost. A wife might manipulate her husband's jealousy to provoke him into war, or use an affair to form an alliance, yet such defiance rarely ended well. In the end, the very weapon of desire became a snare. Desire was also watched by the gods. In pre-Christian Norse belief, female sexuality was bound to fate itself. A woman who bore a child not of her husband could be accused of weakening her kin's luck, its hamingja, its spiritual fortune. And when Christianity spread through Scandinavia, this spiritual taboo hardened into sin. Now adultery was not only dishonor, it was heresy. Thus the Viking woman walked a narrow bridge, suspended between desire and destruction. To step off it meant ruin. To be accused, even falsely, meant facing rituals of shame or punishments of death. But the true horror of Viking justice emerges not in the laws themselves, but in the stories of flesh and blood women whose lives were shattered by accusation. And one such scandal, preserved in saga and song, shows us how quickly suspicion could spiral into devastation. The year is the late 10th century. The Icelandic sagas tell us of a woman named Gudrun Osvifarsdottir, one of the most compelling figures in Laxdæla saga. She was renowned for her beauty, her wit, and her sharp tongue. Men sought her hand, but her life was a storm of broken vows, jealous husbands, and whispered accusations. And it is through her story that we glimpse the razor's edge. Viking women walked between desire and destruction. Gudrun married several times. Each marriage was marked by conflict, betrayal, and rumor. Her second husband, Thorvaldr, suspected her of unfaithfulness. In the saga's telling, he struck her in anger. Gudrun, never one to submit quietly, retaliated. She tricked him into wearing a woman's shirt, mocking him publicly as effeminate, a humiliation worse than any wound. The marriage collapsed in disgrace and divorce followed. For a woman, to cast off a husband was rare, but Gudrun had both wit and kinship ties to shield her. Yet not every woman in her place would have survived. In another telling, she was accused of conspiring with a lover against her husband, this time a matter not of insult, but of blood. Viking law allowed a husband to kill an adulterous wife and her lover if caught together in bed. Others could drag her before the thing, the public assembly, where her honor would be stripped like bark from a tree. The thing was no courtroom of impartial judges. It was a theater of honor. Relatives, neighbors, and rivals gathered, weighing not evidence but reputation. If a woman stood accused, her fate depended less on truth than on the strength of her kin. With no kin to defend her, her word was worth nothing. In Gudrun's saga, the punishment was not drowning or death, but divorce, exile from her husband's household, and whispers that followed her for life. Yet her case reveals something more chilling than execution, the enduring power of shame. The saga preserves the gossip, the slanders, the idea that she was always too clever, too willful, too dangerous. Long after her husbands were buried, Gudrun's name was still bound to scandal. For ordinary women, the outcome could be far harsher. Without Gudrun's family power, an accused wife might have been dragged to the fjord. Bound in a sack, she would vanish beneath the waves, her body silenced by water. Others might be driven into exile, declared utlager, outlaw, with no protection under law. To be outlawed was to be already dead, a life stripped of kinship and mercy. The scandal of Gudrun's life echoes not because she was unique, but because she survived. Her saga lets us see what was at stake. One misstep, one accusation, and her fate could easily have been the sack, the fire, or the gallows. But what happens when accusation becomes weapon? When the charge of infidelity is not just about desire, but about politics, inheritance, and power? The answer lies in the hidden games of seduction and betrayal that unfolded in the halls of Viking chieftains. In Viking society, accusations of infidelity were never merely about the marriage bed. They were weapons, sharpened, honed, and wielded in the endless struggle for land, power, and legacy. What began as whispers of scandal could topple households, spark feuds, and reshape the balance of power between rival chieftains. The sagas give us examples where accusations of adultery were aimed not at the guilty, but at the inconvenient. In Eyrbyggja saga, a woman named Thurida was accused of dishonoring her husband through forbidden intimacy. Yet the suspicion was less about her desires than about political rivalry. By tarnishing her honor, her enemies weakened her husband's position. If his wife was shamed, his reputation was stained. For elite women, the stakes were even higher. Marriages were political contracts, binding great families together. If a noblewoman was accused of adultery, the charge undermined not only her, but her father, her brothers, and her sons. Rival clans could use this to break alliances, seize lands, or reclaim dowries. And in the chaos that followed, blood feuds erupted. The private act of love, or even the rumor of it, could ignite generations of violence. Religion too played its hand. In the pre-Christian world, female infidelity was a threat to honor and inheritance. But after the spread of Christianity in Scandinavia during the 10th and 11th centuries, it became a sin against God himself. Church authorities, seeking to tighten their grip, treated adultery as both a spiritual corruption and a public crime. This doubled the danger for women. They now faced not only the thing, but the priest's judgment, where shame was eternal and punishment could mean fire. The hypocrisy was striking. Men in power, chieftains, kings, warlords, kept concubines openly, their virility a badge of dominance. Yet those same men used accusations of adultery to silence, punish, or dispose of wives who had outlived their political usefulness. A queen accused of dishonor could be set aside without scandal. A rival's wife accused could spark feuds that opened the way for conquest. Desire was less about intimacy than about leverage. We see this in later Scandinavian chronicles, where rulers themselves turned to such tactics. A noblewoman accused of adultery could find herself confined, strangled in silence, or drowned discreetly, her death written off as misfortune. To the powerful, accusations were not about truth but about control. The charge of infidelity was one of the most effective political tools of the age. And so, Viking women lived in a paradox. Their honor was the foundation of their family's power, yet it was also the easiest weapon to attack. A single accusation, even unfounded, could erase them, disinherit their children, and destroy the alliances they embodied. But how did ordinary people respond? Away from the halls of chieftains and the intrigues of kings, what did daily life look like for women who lived under the constant threat of shame, exile, or death? The answer lies in the rituals of everyday punishment, where humiliation became a public spectacle, and the fear of dishonor shaped even the most intimate parts of life. If Viking law codes and sagas show us the framework of punishment, it is in daily life that we find its sharpest edge. For the ordinary woman, wife, mother, thrall, accusations of infidelity were not remote scandals, but a constant shadow. Picture a small Icelandic farmstead, a turf-roofed hall, smoke curling from its chimney, livestock penned nearby. The husband is away on a trading voyage, gone for months, perhaps years. Neighbors whisper, watching his wife. A visiting kinsman lingers too long at the fire, a smile exchanged too freely, and the rumors begin. In a culture where gossip was as deadly as steel, the mere suggestion of infidelity could destroy a woman's life. Punishments often began with humiliation. The most common was the cutting of hair. Long hair symbolized dignity, femininity, even nobility. To shear it off was to strip a woman of her identity. Some were paraded through the settlement, forced to wear rags, jeered at as their children looked on. Others were made to stand on a dung heap, literally placed in filth, while the community spat, mocked, or recited shaming verses. These rituals were not designed to kill. They were designed to annihilate reputation. In a society where honor meant survival, being branded as nidinga, dishonored, was a social death sentence. Without kinship ties, without dignity, a woman might live physically, but she would be dead in every other sense. The sagas capture this cruelty. In Njal's saga, the weapon is not an axe, but words. Characters mock women with verses implying promiscuity, verses that could spread like fire across the region. A single line of poetry could follow a woman for life, repeated in feasts, remembered in courts, long after her accusers were dust. In a world where reputation lived longer than flesh, this was eternal punishment. Daily fear was sharpened by the stark double standard. A man could father children outside marriage with little consequence. A woman, however, risked everything: her dowry, her children's inheritance, her survival. Even slaves, often forced into sexual relationships, bore the cruelest irony. They could be punished for adultery despite never having the right to refuse. This culture of suspicion bled into the fabric of family life. Husbands returned from raids watchful, their honor tied to their wives' behavior. Children inherited the whispers surrounding their mothers. And neighbors, eager to preserve their own reputations, sometimes denounced women before the thing to divert suspicion from their own households. But there was also resistance, quiet and dangerous. Some women turned shame back on their accusers, composing biting verses of their own. Others sought divorce, using law codes that, though rare, allowed women to leave abusive or dishonored husbands. Yet for most, resistance was crushed beneath fear. Daily life in Viking society was not only about farming, feasting, and raiding. It was about constant vigilance. For women, every glance, every word, every gesture carried risk. And when punishment struck, it struck not only their bodies but their children, their kin, and their name. Yet humiliation was not always the end. For some, accusation escalated beyond shame into blood. And it was in these moments that Viking punishments crossed the threshold from symbolic to lethal, from ritual humiliation to execution. There comes a point when humiliation is no longer enough, when whispers harden into accusations, and accusations ignite into fury. The Viking world revealed its darkest hand. For some women, shame ended not in exile, but in death. The sagas and laws record it quietly, but archaeology and oral memory speak louder. When a husband caught his wife in the act, Viking law gave him terrifying authority. He could kill both her and her lover on the spot, without trial. No assembly, no thing, no witnesses required. The act itself was considered its own judgment, and blood could wash away dishonor. For women, this meant their very lives depended on their husband's mercy or his rage. But execution was not always swift. One of the most feared punishments was drowning. Women were tied in sacks, often alongside animals, a cat, a dog, or a snake, as if to mark them with mockery. The sack was sewn shut, heavy stones added, and cast into rivers or fjords. Death came slowly, in the cold silence beneath the water, while those on shore believed the dishonor itself was sinking away with the body. Others met the flames. When Christianity seeped into the north, adultery merged with sin, and some women accused of betrayal found themselves condemned as witches. The same fire that purified heresy consumed those accused of lust. To be tied to a stake, surrounded by kindling, was to suffer a death both public and sanctified. The crowd gathered, not only to witness justice, but to feel that sin itself was being cleansed from their midst. Outlawry was another death sentence in disguise. A woman declared Utlaga became a ghost among the living. No one could feed her, shelter her, or speak for her without risking punishment themselves. If found, she could be killed without consequence, her body left to rot unburied. In the harsh landscapes of Iceland or Norway, exile was a slower form of execution. Death by hunger, cold, or solitude. The sagas give us glimpses of women begging for mercy at these turning points. Some pleaded before assemblies. Others swore oaths to their innocence, holding sacred relics or invoking the gods. Yet oaths were fragile. A single man's testimony could outweigh a woman's voice, and once shame hardened into judgment, little could turn the tide. These punishments carried a meaning beyond the act itself. They were warnings. Each drowning, each burning, each outlawry reminded the community of the cost of betrayal. The spectacle mattered as much as the sentence. For the Vikings, punishing women for infidelity was not only about justice, it was about preserving the illusion of order, the fragile balance of honor that kept families and clans intact. But in that preservation, something darker emerged. The Viking world, so often praised for its fierce independence and exploration, revealed its dependence on fear. Fear of shame, fear of betrayal, fear of women's desire. And as these punishments multiplied, their consequences rippled beyond individual lives. They shaped the culture itself, leaving scars that would echo through generations. To understand their true weight, we must look not only at the deaths of these women, but at the long shadows they cast over Viking history. There comes a point when humiliation is no longer enough, when whispers harden into accusations, and accusations ignite into fury. The Viking world revealed its darkest hand. But execution was not always swift. One of the most feared punishments was drowning. Women were tied in sacks, often alongside animals, a cat, a dog, or a snake, as if to mark them with mockery. The sack was sewn shut, heavy stones added and cast into rivers or fjords. Death came slowly, in the cold silence beneath the water, while those on shore believed the dishonor itself was sinking away with the body. Others met the flames. When Christianity seeped into the north, adultery merged with sin, and some women accused of betrayal found themselves condemned as witches. The same fire that purified heresy consumed those accused of lust. To be tied to a stake, surrounded by kindling, was to suffer a death both public and sanctified. The crowd gathered not only to witness justice, but to feel that sin itself was being cleansed from their midst. Outlawry was another death sentence in disguise. A woman declared Utlager became a ghost among the living. No one could feed her, shelter her, or speak for her without risking punishment themselves. If found, she could be killed without consequence, her body left to rot unburied. In the harsh landscapes of Iceland or Norway, exile was a slower form of execution, death by hunger, cold, or solitude. The sagas give us glimpses of women begging for mercy at these turning points. Some pleaded before assemblies, others swore oaths to their innocence, holding sacred relics or invoking the gods. Yet oaths were fragile. A single man's testimony could outweigh a woman's voice. And once shame hardened into judgment, little could turn the tide. These punishments carried a meaning beyond the act itself. They were warnings. Each drowning, each burning, each outlawry reminded the community of the cost of betrayal. The spectacle mattered as much as the sentence. For the Vikings, punishing women for infidelity was not only about justice, it was about preserving the illusion of order, the fragile balance of honor that kept families and clans intact. But in that preservation, something darker emerged. The Viking world, so often praised for its fierce independence and exploration, revealed its dependence on fear of shame, fear of betrayal, fear of women's desire. And as these punishments multiplied, their consequences rippled beyond individual lives. They shaped the culture itself, leaving scars that would echo through generations. To understand their true weight, we must look not only at the deaths of these women, but at the long shadows they cast over Viking history. The torches fade, the fjords grow still, the sagas fall silent. Yet the echoes of Viking punishments for women accused of infidelity remain. Echoes that travel not only through history, but into our present. We began with the image of a woman drowned in a sack, her voice muffled, her body swallowed by black water. To Viking eyes, her death was not cruelty, but justice. It preserved honor, cleansed shame, restored order. But what does that tell us about the society that demanded it? That fear of dishonor was stronger than compassion, and that a woman's desire was more dangerous than an enemy's sword. The conclusion is inescapable. Punishment was never just about the act. It was about control of lineage, of inheritance, of male pride, of cultural identity itself. By punishing women with shame, exile, or death, Viking society broadcast its most urgent message. Female sexuality belonged to the clan, not the self. And yet, if we strip away the saga verses and the Norse law codes, does this logic truly feel foreign, or is it uncomfortably familiar? Around the world today, countless women still face honor killings, shaming rituals, or social exile for the same alleged betrayal. In some cultures, their heads are shaved. In others, they are cast out by their families. In the most brutal cases, they are murdered to restore honor. 1,000 years may separate us from the Vikings, but the belief that a woman's body must carry the weight of male dignity has never fully vanished. Even in more subtle forms, the double standard survives. In modern societies, men's infidelities are often excused or overlooked, while women are branded with harsher judgment. Gossip, reputation, whispers, they remain weapons as sharp as they were in the sagas. Online, digital shame replaces the public dung heap, yet the effect is the same. Humiliation, isolation, fear. The Viking punishments, then, are not relics of a barbaric age. They are mirrors, reflecting truths about how societies police desire, control intimacy, and enforce silence. By studying them, we are forced to ask, how much have we really changed? There is also a haunting mystery. How many women vanished into fjords, their names lost, their stories unrecorded? How many sagas of love and betrayal were erased because they did not fit the honor code of their time? The silence of archaeology suggests countless lives unmarked, countless voices drowned. The brutality of Viking justice was not only in the punishments themselves, but in the forgetting that followed. And yet, there were survivors. Figures like Gudrun Osvifarsdottir, who endured divorce, scandal, and rumor, only to outlive her husbands and carve her place in saga memory. Their survival reminds us that even under the weight of fear, women resisted, adapted, endured. In their endurance, we glimpse another truth, that punishment, no matter how severe, never fully erased desire or silenced defiance. So as we close this journey into Viking punishment, the questions turn back upon us. What would you have done in that hall as the accusations rang out? Would you have joined the jeering crowd, casting stones of gossip? Would you have looked away as the sack was dragged to the water's edge? Or would you have spoken out, risking your own honor to save another's life? History does not give us comfortable answers. It gives us mirrors, shadows, reminders of what we are capable of, both in cruelty and in courage. The Vikings believed they were preserving order by silencing women accused of infidelity, but in truth they preserved fear, and fear is the most enduring legacy of all. If the fjords of Norway once swallowed women in silence, what secrets still lie buried in the histories we choose not to tell? This is the forbidden history of the Vikings. Not the romance of longships, but the horror of drowned wives, outlawed mothers, and shamed daughters. And it forces us to ask, when desire collides with honor, who truly pays the price? So the next time you hear of Viking sagas, remember that behind the tales of glory and conquest lies another story, one of silence, shame, and forgotten screams. What other secrets lie hidden in the sagas, waiting to be uncovered? What other truths about power, control, and desire remain locked in history's shadows? Stay with us, because this was only one story, and there are countless others still to tell.